I think I am mostly cautiously optimistic this time around because the US has decided to talk directly with the Taliban, and that was a major hurdle for the Taliban, and they insisted on meeting the US face to face because in their perspective that the Afghan government does not have the authority or the power to talk about peace or reconciliations, that the United States holds the key in Afghanistan to end this conflict.
Now, this certainly is a start. As you said, the US has kick-started the process. But the big question is, would you say that Afghanistan is ready for peace?
Well, the people are ready. Afghans have been ready for the past 17 years. They have suffered a lot.
But I think we agree on the point that it doesn't really depend on the people whether the peace process is going to be a success.
Well, if we are talking about the government, I think there are some concerns about the government in Kabul, the regime. There are forces, groups who do not want to see peace in Afghanistan. They have a vested interest in this conflict. And and it is, again, I would say the ball is in the U.S. court. If the U.S. is really serious, if it wants peace, then it has the power to exert pressure on the Afghan sides to come to the table and to agree to this settlement. The U.S. must play a very important role in this.
Now, of course, Wahed Faqiri, you're saying a lot depends on the US. And speaking of that, we are witnessing a clear change of tactics when it comes to that administration. They're now essentially dealing with insurgents, the Taliban. Does that, in your opinion, pave the way for them to essentially start negotiating with the likes of Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and frankly, that list goes on? Surely any country where the stakes are high for Washington.
I think Taliban have been ready for this. They know that the Afghans are tired. The 3 days ceasefire has proven this point that the Afghans are very angry. Thirsty for peace. And there is also pressure on the Taliban to come to the table and to resolve this nonsense war that has been going on for 17 years. There is no benefit for anyone in this war. I think there is pressure on all sides to come to the table.
Hey, Wahed Faqiri, that's an interesting point that you're making there. My question is actually about the US administration's policy of negotiating, sitting around a negotiating table with insurgents. Can you see something like that happening with other groups that are somewhat ostracized by the international community, people who've caused a lot of harm to civilians? I named one of them, Boko Haram.
Well, there is a difference between the Boko Haram and the Taliban. The Taliban's been in power for 4 years, for 5 years. They were driven out of power by the U.S. They are not, as the USA admitted, they are not a terrorist group. They were a
the
government.
USA has actually approved the sale of 12 military planes and security equipment, which is costing them some $600 million to Nigeria to try and help eradicate them. So it seems like the stakes are indeed very high for them in the country against the Boko Haram.
We were talking about Afghanistan. I think in Afghanistan, the U.S. has tried their military tactics for the past 17 years. It didn't work. And they are admitting now, acknowledging that this war has been a stalemate. And there is no other party than the Taliban. If you want to have a peace in Afghanistan, you have to talk to the Taliban. There is no one else in there. So that's one side of the conflict. And the U.S. is another side of the conflict. These, there may be other examples in another part of the world, but in this particular problem in Afghanistan, we have two sides, the Taliban and the Americans, and they must face each other, must talk to each other in order to resolve this conflict.